Silver Moon Diner. Phoenix, Tegoliksarki. Almost midnight. The last customer hadn't ordered anything in 40 minutes. Rachel noticed him the moment she refilled the coffee counter. The gray suit, the gold ring catching the fluorescent light, the way he watched her move like he was timing something. She kept working. She was good at that. Keeping her head down, tray level, smile just wide enough. Then his hand closed around her wrist. No warning. No words first. He simply grabbed her and pulled. And suddenly she was halfway into the seat beside him, the edge of the table pressing into her ribs. She kept her voice low, deliberate. Let go of my arm, now. He smiled. Didn't move. 3 coworkers found something urgent to look at across the room. The night manager took one step toward the kitchen and kept going. Nobody moved. Then a chair scraped. In the corner booth, work boots, a jacket still carrying drywall dust, a man set down his glass and stood up. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't touch anyone. He just walked over and said. She said, let go. The hand released. But the man in the gray suit didn't look at the man who'd spoken. He looked at Rachel. And what he said next wasn't loud enough for anyone else to hear. This isn't over. I know where you work. He said it like a reminder, like he'd already decided what came next, and tonight was just the opening move. What he didn't know, what nobody in that diner knew, was who she actually was. Ethan Brooks had not planned to stay this long. He'd finished the electrical panel in the back hallway at 10:40. A junction box the owner had been putting off for 3 months, 2 loose ground wires, and a breaker that clicked when it shouldn't. Standard work. He charged $180, packed his tools, and decided he was too tired to drive home without eating first. That was the plan. Leave Dowaway. Be home before Lucy woke up. He ordered the cheapest thing on the menu and sat in the corner booth because the corner booth meant his back was to the wall and he could see the whole room. 7 years running construction sites had made that automatic. You always knew where the exits were. You always watched the room. He wasn't watching for anything in particular. What he did when the man in the gray suit grabbed the waitress wasn't heroic. He would have been annoyed if anyone called it that. It was the same reflex he used when a crew member started a confrontation on site. You stand up, move to a position with clear sight lines, and say exactly one thing. Not a threat, not a speech. One sentence, at a volume that makes the other person do the math. The math always came out the same way. But afterward, paying at the register, Ethan watched the waitress pick up her cleaning cloth. Her hands were shaking. Not visibly, not the kind of shaking that made anything tremble. The kind you only noticed in the knuckles, white where they wrapped around the rag, releasing slowly, gripping again. She didn't want anyone to see it. Ethan could tell. She was working hard to make sure no one did. He recognized that. He'd seen it on job sites. The worker who had almost had an accident and spent the rest of the shift pretending he hadn't. The effort of holding yourself together in front of people who were already looking somewhere else. He left a 20 on the counter and went outside to wait for his Uber. His truck was at a shop on Camelback Road, a transmission issue he'd been ignoring until it stopped being ignorable. He sat on the concrete step and pulled out his phone. Lucy had sent a voice message at 10:15. Dad, Margaret said I can have cereal for breakfast if you're not back. Is that okay? Also, I drew something for you. It's a dog. We should get a dog. We should get a dog. The diner door opened behind him. The waitress stepped out, untying her apron, tote bag over one shoulder. She stopped when she saw him still there. Looked at him the way people looked at strangers they'd already categorized and then had to recategorize. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, he said. He didn't add anything. He wasn't trying to be interesting. She stood there, still evaluating. He looked back at his phone. 30 seconds passed. "You have a kid," she said. Not quite a question. She'd seen the phone case. A child's drawing laminated onto the back. Too much green crayon. Total confidence. 8 years old, he said. "She's with who right now?" "Neighbor. She knows I'm on my way." Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Her thumb didn't move. She just stood there, reading the same thing twice. Ethan didn't ask. He waited. "You okay?" he said after a moment. She started to say fine. He could see it forming. But her hand tightened around the phone the way her hand had tightened around the cloth inside, and she knew he saw it, and the word didn't come. He didn't push. He just moved over slightly on the step. Not an invitation, just a man shifting his weight, and looked back at the street. His phone lit up. A video call. He answered it because he always answered it. Lucy appeared on screen, hair sideways from the pillow, one eye more open than the other. "Dad, are you coming home soon?" 10 minutes, Bug. "Okay. Margaret made me go to bed, but I'm not actually asleep." "I can see that." "Okay, bye." She hung up. The screen went dark. The waitress was still looking at it. Ethan watched her look at it. She wasn't sentimental. He could see that. She wasn't thinking how sweet. She was running something through a filter. Reaching a conclusion quietly, the way people did when they'd learned to trust their own read on things. "Okay," she said. "Walk me to the corner." Her name was Rachel. He didn't ask for more than that, and she didn't offer it. What Rachel Cole had learned in 6 weeks of waiting tables was this: people didn't look at your face when you brought their food. Tips determined whether you could afford your prescription that week. And when someone treated you badly, there was no HR to call. There was only you, and what you decided to do next. She had known these things before, the way you knew things from reports and briefings and the quarterly summaries of organizations that studied such matters. But knowing something from a document was different from knowing it in your feet at the end of a double shift, in the specific arithmetic of counting ones and quarters in the break room at 11 p.m. on T. Her father had understood the difference. That was why he'd sent her. 8 months ago, Rachel had stood in front of the Cole Group's board and rejected a $400 million acquisition. The target company's warehouse conditions, she'd said. The turnover rate. The way the workers on the floor described their supervisors. She had made the right call, she still believed that. But when the board asked her to quantify it, to model the reputational and operational risk in numbers they could put in a slide deck, she'd gone quiet. Her father had waited until the others left the room. Then he'd said simply, "You made the right call. But you couldn't explain why. Go learn why." $800 in cash. A prepaid phone. 90 days. No name, no card, no help. She had rented a studio on Linwood Street for $650 a month, taken the first service job she could find, and started paying attention to things she had previously only read about. 6 weeks in, she had learned a great deal. She had also, tonight, been grabbed by the wrist by a man named Victor Kane, and the thing that made her angriest, standing outside the diner reading his text message in the dark, was not what he'd done. It was that her hands were shaking, and she couldn't make them stop. She was still thinking about that when she said, "Okay, walk me to the corner," to a man she'd known for 11 minutes. The next morning, her manager Dale called her into his office. Dale was not a bad man. He was a tired man. The kind who had been making small compromises for so long he no longer noticed he was making them. He didn't meet her eyes right away. "Victor Kane called this morning. He wants to apologize, says it was a misunderstanding." Rachel waited. He's also the one who holds the lease on this building. Has for 11 years. She was moved to the Tuesday-Wednesday day shift. 11 to 3. She did the math in 4 seconds. A 40% drop in weekly income. Not enough to cover rent and groceries both if it held. Okay, she said. Dale finally looked at her. He seemed to be waiting for something else. Argument, tears, a threat. When none of it came, something moved across his face. Briefly. Then, it was gone. She picked up her order pad and went back to work. She started asking careful questions that afternoon. A coworker named Priya, restocking ketchup bottles, mentioned a girl named Jess who used to have Rachel's Friday shift. The dishwasher, Marcus, mentioned someone named Carla. Rachel waited for the right moment. The two who left before me, she said to Priya. What happened? Priya turned a ketchup bottle upside down over another and watched it drain. They just left. Pretty fast. Both of them? Within a week. Priya set the bottle down. Don't ask me anything else. I have a kid too. Rachel used the library computer on her lunch break. Public records. Court filings. A business news archive that cost $8 a month. She found 2 women who had filed complaints in the past 5 years. Both resolved before trial. Both with non-disclosure agreements. She found the name of a judge who had ruled on a zoning variance that made Victor Kane's largest Phoenix development possible 3 years ago. She sat back in the plastic library chair. This was not a man who lost his temper. This was a man with a system, one he had been running for years quietly, against people who didn't have the resources to push back. The reason no one had stopped him wasn't that no one had tried. It was that trying alone, without money or connections, meant losing. That evening, Ethan came back to the diner to finish the conduit work he'd left that morning. She waited until the other waitress went on break. I found some things, she said, about him. Ethan set his toolbox down. He already knew who she meant. She told him what she'd found. The 2 women, the complaints, the settlements. The general shape of it. A man who knew which levers to pull and pulled them in the right order. Ethan listened without filling the silence or reaching for a response before she finished. Then he said, What do you want to happen? Rachel stopped. In 6 weeks, she had been asked what she wanted to order, whether she could cover Thursday if she needed change for a 50. She had been given instructions and schedules and advice. Nobody had asked her what she wanted. Not Dale. Not Priya. Not her father, who had handed her $800 and a prepaid phone and told her to go learn something, as if the lesson were already formed and she just needed to go collect it. She stood behind the counter with a damp cloth in her hand and realized she didn't have an answer. And for the first time, the absence of an answer didn't feel like failure. It felt like the question was real and worth sitting with, and she hadn't been sitting with it honestly until now. I don't know yet, she said. Ethan nodded once. Like that was a reasonable place to start. He picked up his toolbox and went back down the hallway. Rachel watched him go. She thought about what she'd seen the night before. The way he'd moved across the room. No hurry. No performance. He'd read the distance, chosen his angle, and said 4 words at exactly the right volume. Not bravery. Precision. The kind that came from somewhere specific, from years of reading situations that could go wrong in ways that mattered. She didn't know what she was going to do yet, but she was beginning to think she didn't have to figure it out entirely alone. He saw the man before Lucy did. That was the only thing that mattered later, when he replayed it. He'd been standing at the chain-link fence where he always stood, 2 minutes before the bell, the same spot every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 years. The man was already there, not at the fence, not close enough to be obvious, but near the side wall of the building across the street. Weight on his back foot. Not looking at his phone. Not walking anywhere. Just watching the gate. The bell rang. Lucy came out at a run, backpack bouncing. "Dad, we did fractions and I think I actually get it now. Like actually get it." "That's good, bug." He put his hand on her shoulder and turned them both toward the car. In the rearview mirror, pulling out of the pickup lane, he watched the man in the gray-green jacket turn and walk the other direction. Ethan memorized the jacket. North Face. A small tear on the left shoulder seam. He didn't tell Lucy anything. He asked about the fractions. He made dinner. He watched her do homework. After she was in bed, he opened his laptop and pulled up the camera footage from that afternoon. A small WISE unit he'd wired above the front door 14 months ago, after a string of car break-ins on the block. 4 p.m. The man in the gray-green jacket stood on the sidewalk in front of the house. Looked at the door. Looked at the window. Checked his phone once and put it back. Stood there for 17 minutes. Walked away. Ethan sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. The house was quiet. From down the hall came Lucy's sound machine, the ocean setting, the one Claire had put in her room years ago, and Lucy had never let them take away. He looked at the photograph on the kitchen shelf. Claire at 29, standing outside the apartment on 7th Avenue, squinting into the sun, laughing at something off camera. He had taken the picture himself. He still couldn't remember what she'd been laughing at. He thought about the choice in front of him, turning it over the way he'd learned to turn over problems on job sites, not looking for the clean answer, because there usually wasn't one, but looking for which cost he could live with. If he walked away, Rachel alone, Victor recalibrated. Someone else, next month, in the same position, with no one at the corner booth. If he stayed, Lucy was already in the picture. Not because of anything Rachel had done, because Victor had put her there. He sat with it, the fact that neither option was clean. He had spent 3 years building a life that was small and controlled and safe. Small enough to hold, safe enough that nothing could fall through while he wasn't watching. He had done it for Lucy, or told himself he had. But sitting in his kitchen at 11 at night, looking at the camera footage of a man standing in front of his house for 17 minutes, he wondered whether what he'd really been doing was protecting himself, building something that couldn't surprise him, couldn't reach past the edges he'd drawn. Some things reached past edges anyway. He called Margaret first. She answered on the second ring, awake, one of her British procedurals on low in the background. "I need a favor for the next few days," he said. "Don't let Lucy outside by herself. Not even the front yard. I'll explain more when I can." A pause. Margaret had lived next door for 11 years. She had watched him carry Claire's things out of the house in boxes. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Of course," she said. "You be careful." He was at the school by 7:40 the next morning. He found Lucy's teacher, Ms. Okafor, in the hallway, and the security guard Roy, who'd worked the school for 6 years and knew every regular parent by face. He kept it brief. Unfamiliar man near the gate and near his home address, gray-green jacket, tear on the left shoulder seam. He asked that Lucy not be released to anyone other than himself or Margaret. Roy wrote it down. Ms. Okafor looked at him steadily and said she understood. Then Ethan sat in his truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes after the bell rang, watching the gate. The man didn't come. That night, he called Rachel and told her everything. The man at the school, the 17 minutes on the camera, what he'd done about it. He didn't soften it. She was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't mean to pull you into this," she said. "You didn't," he said. He did. They met at a coffee shop on 7th Street. Ethan's suggestion, half empty on weekday mornings, the kind of place where a conversation stayed private. He was already there when she arrived, window seat, back to the wall. He'd spent 2 days talking to a former colleague named Danny Reyes, who had worked general contracting in Phoenix for 15 years and knew the significant players in commercial real estate. What Danny told him matched what Rachel had found and added one thing she hadn't known. Victor Kane had submitted a bid 7 weeks ago on a mixed-use development in Tempe. $47 million. Final approval expected within 6 weeks. The licensing board ran routine background reviews as part of the process. He needs this to disappear, Ethan said, when Rachel sat down. Not because he's embarrassed, because there's $47 million that goes away if his record isn't clean. Rachel's hands wrapped around her coffee cup. That changes the timeline. It changes everything. She was working through it. He could see that. The way she looked slightly past his shoulder when she was thinking, assembling something. Then her phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at the screen, and something shifted in her face. Quick, controlled, there and gone. "Give me a second," she said. She stood and walked toward the back hallway. Ethan looked out the window at 7th Street. He wasn't trying to listen. But the shop was small, and the exposed brick carried sound. "Dad, I know. I'm handling it." A pause. "No, don't send anyone. I said no." She came back and sat down, picked up her coffee, looked at him. He looked back. "Who was that?" he asked. 3 seconds passed. In a normal conversation, 3 seconds was nothing. In this one, it was long enough to change the shape of everything. "Rachel," he said. "Who are you?" She told him. Not because he'd pushed. Not because she'd been caught. She told him because in 6 weeks of carrying plates and counting tips and being nobody in particular, this was the first time someone had asked her a question that actually wanted an answer. She told him about her father, Alexander Cole, the Cole Group, the board meeting where she'd stood up and turned down a $400 million deal and then couldn't explain it in numbers when they asked, the cash in the prepaid phone in the studio on Linwood Street, and 90 days of being someone she'd had to learn to be. Ethan listened. When she finished, he stood up and walked to the window. He stood there looking out at the street. A food truck setting up on the corner, a man walking a dog that stopped at every parking meter. He stayed there long enough that the silence became its own kind of presence. "You have a phone call away from ending this," he said. "Yes. But you haven't called." "No. Duh." He turned around. "Why?" She looked at him, and something underneath the careful neutral she'd been wearing since she sat down came through. Something she'd been carrying for weeks without quite naming, even to herself. "Because if I call, I'll never know if I could have," she said. "And I need to know." The espresso machine ran for a few seconds and stopped. Someone laughed at the counter. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He didn't agree with the choice. He wanted to be honest about that. She had an exit that he didn't have, and staying while other people absorbed the consequences was a kind of privilege, even if she couldn't see it clearly from inside it. But he also understood the specific weight of not knowing. He had lived with a version of it for 3 years. The question of whether he could have done something differently the night Claire died. Whether a different road, a different call, a different small choice somewhere in the chain would have ended with a different phone ringing at midnight. He had never been able to answer it. He had learned, slowly and badly, to stop asking. But he understood why you couldn't stop asking until you knew. He came back to the table and sat down. 2 conditions, he said. If Lucy is in danger, not followed, actually in danger, I stop. No discussion. Understood. And we do this correctly. Evidence that holds. Channels that can't be closed by a call to the right judge. Agreed. He looked at her a moment. You turned down a $400 million deal. Yes. Can you read a commercial lease agreement? Something almost like a smile. Yes. Good, he said. We're going to need that. They worked carefully, and they worked in the right order. Ethan reached out through Danny Reyes to two women who had filed complaints against Victor Kane. One didn't respond. The second called back from a number he didn't recognize and asked, before anything else, how he had found her. Her name was Diane Marsh. She had worked as an office manager for one of Victor's subsidiaries for 3 years. Filed a complaint 18 months ago. The complaint had been documented and not acted on. She had been sent NDA paperwork twice. Both times, she had not signed it. Not out of strategy, but because she couldn't afford an attorney to review it, and she had a principle, small and stubborn, about not signing things she didn't understand. They met at a Panera on Scottsdale Road. She was already there when Ethan arrived, sitting at a corner table with a coffee she hadn't touched, and a manila folder flat in front of her hands. He explained who he was and what he was trying to do. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for long enough that he thought she was going to say no. Her hands stayed on the folder. She didn't open it yet. I kept everything, she said. Every email, every message. For 2 years I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't delete it either. Like deleting it would mean it hadn't happened. She looked at him. I'm not doing this because I'm brave. I want you to know that. I'm doing it because I've been carrying this for 2 years, and it's the only thing left I can do with it. That's enough, Ethan said. One shot. I can't do a second round. One shot is enough, if we do it right. She slid the folder across the table. Meanwhile, Rachel made 2 calls from a payphone at a gas station on Indian School Road. Not paranoia, she told herself. Precision. The first was to the Arizona Department of Real Estate Licensing Division, asking without giving her name about the process for submitting third-party evidence in a complaint review. The second was to a reporter named Maya Torres at the Arizona Republic, who had written a 4-part series the previous year on settlement agreements in commercial real estate. Rachel had read all 4 parts in the library. She'd read them the way she read everything. For structure, for where the argument held and where it needed more. She told Maya Torres she had documentation of a pattern of conduct, 2 confirmed witnesses, and a regulatory filing in progress. She did not give her name. She gave enough. Maya Torres said she was listening. Victor came in on a Tuesday morning, dressed down, no suit, dark button-down, slacks. He sat at the counter and was pleasant to the waitress who poured his coffee. When Rachel came past with menus for table 6, he turned on his stool and looked at her. I wanted to apologize, he said. I wasn't myself that night. Accepted, Rachel said. He looked at her with the same measuring quality she'd seen before. Not anger, calculation. Steady and patient. I heard you've been asking around, he said. About me. I ask about a lot of things, Rachel said. Coffee refill? He left a 20 on the counter and walked out. She waited until his car pulled out of the lot. Then she called Ethan. He knows. Not everything, but enough. We need to decide, keep going or stop. A beat of silence. I'll call Diane, Ethan said. We move this week. Ethan chose the time and location deliberately. The lunch rush at Silver Moon, 9 tables occupied, the sound of flatware and voices filling the room. He called Diane and she agreed without hesitating. He parked across the street and watched through the window. Diane came in at 12:38 and took the booth second from the door. She ordered a grilled cheese. She kept her phone face down and her hands in her lap. Victor arrived at 12:43. Ethan watched him scan the room, quickly, without making it obvious, and settle on the same counter stool as before. Watched Rachel bring him coffee. Watched the conversation he couldn't hear. Victor's posture stayed open the whole time. Relaxed. Both forearms on the counter. He spoke and Rachel listened, and then she said something brief. And then he leaned forward slightly, and Rachel put both hands flat on the counter and stood straight. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just looked at him. Across the room, Diane Marsh stood up from her booth. Ethan saw the moment Victor understood. A stiffening across the shoulders. His eyes moved from Rachel to Diane and held there, running through the math, finding the flaw in the system he'd built on one reliable premise, that the people he chose were always alone. He stood up from the stool, straightened his shirt, walked to the door without hurrying, still controlled. Ethan sat in his truck and watched him go. He thought about what it had cost to get here. Diane's folder. 2 years of carried weight. Rachel standing in her apron at a payphone on Indian School Road. He thought about the 17 minutes on the camera footage, and Lucy asleep with the ocean sounds coming through her door, and the choice he'd sat with at the kitchen table. He thought about the look on Victor Kane's face when the system developed a flaw. Some things were worth the cost. Not all of them, but some. The filing went to the Arizona Department of Real Estate the following Monday. Audio from a public place, 18 months of emails, Diane's signed statement. Maya Torres published on Wednesday. The piece named Victor Kane, cited the regulatory filing, and referenced 2 previous complaints. By Thursday afternoon, 2 more women had contacted Maya Torres independently. By Friday, Victor Kane's application for the Tempe development had been withdrawn. Rachel read the article on her phone in the Silver Moon parking lot, still in her apron. She read it once and put her phone away and stood there for a while. She had expected to feel something clean. Relief, maybe. The particular quiet that came after something difficult was finished. What she felt was tired. Tired in a way that sat behind the sternum and didn't move. She thought about Diane, carrying a folder for 2 years because she couldn't bring herself to delete the evidence of something that had happened to her. She thought about the 2 women who'd signed NDAs and lived with whatever that decision had cost them in the years since. She had understood this, cited it in board presentations, referenced it in acquisition analyses. She had not known what it felt like until now, standing in a parking lot in Phoenix in a coffee-stained apron, $40 in tips in her pocket. Her father had said, "Go learn why." She had. On the 90th day, she sat on the edge of her bed on Linwood Street and called him. He answered on the second ring. The particular quality of silence in the background told her he was in his San Francisco office. 14th floor, the view she'd grown up thinking was what all offices looked like. She told him everything. From the beginning. Victor Ethan, what? Diane. The plan, the filing, the article. When she finished, he was quiet for 7 seconds. She counted. "Did you need help?" he asked. She had been thinking about how to answer this for 3 days. "Once," she said, "I realized I couldn't do it alone. Not because I wasn't capable, but because it required more than one person. So I found someone I could trust and we worked together. It wasn't asking for help. It was knowing who to work with." Another silence. Shorter. "That's the answer I was waiting for," he said. She didn't go back to being Rachel Alexandra Cole right away. She spent one more day in the apartment. She wrote 4 letters by hand. To Dale, to Priya, to Marcus the dishwasher who had worked at the Silver Moon for 9 years and always divided the side work fairly, and to Diane. Not apologies. Just specific things she had learned from each of them, named precisely, without sentiment. Then she found Ethan. He was fixing the fence along the Delgado property next door. 2 boards rotted out over winter, The neighbor's son kept asking his father to get to it, and eventually Ethan had offered to do it for cost of materials. That was the kind of street it was. He heard the car and looked up. Rachel got out. Jeans. Gray t-shirt. The same tote bag from every shift. She had made a choice about how to show up for this conversation, and she had made it carefully. "I wanted to tell you myself," she said, "before you read it somewhere." He set down the hammer. She told him everything. Her father, the Cole Group, the $2.10 billion, and the board meeting and the acquisition and the 90 days. When she finished, he was quiet. He looked at the fence boards, at the grain of the new wood against the old. Then he looked at her. "So this whole time," he said, "you had a way out?" "Yes." "And you didn't use it?" "No." He looked at her. Not angry, she could see that, and she was watching closely. He was working through something that didn't have a clean resolution, the way she'd watched him work through everything else. Without rushing, without pretending the complexity wasn't there. "I don't know what to do with that," he said. "You don't have to do anything with it," she said. "I just wanted you to know the truth before I said the next thing." The screen door opened. Lucy came out at a run, sneakers untied, a drawing in one hand. She saw Rachel, stopped for exactly 1 second, then crossed the yard and wrapped both arms around Rachel's waist. No words, no clever observation, just a child moving towards someone she was glad to see, with the complete absence of calculation that children had before they learned to second-guess themselves. Ethan watched his daughter. 3 years of building walls, making his world small enough to hold, safe enough to keep. He had told himself it was for Lucy, and it had been, partly. But watching her now, arms around a woman she'd met twice, face turned sideways against the gray t-shirt, he wondered whether he'd also been protecting himself, building something that couldn't surprise him, that couldn't reach him. Rachel had surprised him at every turn, and she was still standing in his yard, and his daughter was holding on to her like she'd been expected. "I didn't just come to tell you that," Rachel said. She reached into the tote bag and set an envelope on the fence post. "I came to offer you a job." He looked at the envelope, didn't touch it. "Head of Safety and Operations," she said. "My father's company is expanding. 3 cities in the next 18 months. Tucson, Denver, Salt Lake. Mixed-use developments, each one larger than the last. We need someone who understands how construction actually works. Not the version on the org chart. The version where the version where it rains on the concrete poor day, and the electrical sub doesn't show, and the site supervisor has to hold 12 different problems at..." "Rachel, you ran crews of 40 to 60 people for 7 years, she said. "Last week you coordinated a 3-person operation with a 2-day timeline and no budget, and it worked, because you thought through every variable before you moved. That's not handyman work. That's what companies pay people a great deal of money to do badly." She nodded at the envelope. $150,000 a year. You set your own schedule around Lucy's school. Start whenever you're ready." Ethan stood very still. Lucy had let go of Rachel and drifted to the porch step, sitting down with her drawing, pretending to look at it. She was not looking at it. He picked up the envelope, turning it over once, set it back on the post. "I need to think," he said. "Take the week," she said. That night, after Lucy was asleep, and the ocean sounds came faintly through her door, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his phone. He'd been putting it off for 2 hours, cleaning up dinner, checking the camera, reading the same 3 pages of a library book he wasn't absorbing. He typed Alexander Cole into the search bar. Alexander Cole, Coal Group. Try. Net worth approximately $2.10 billion. Forbes, Real Estate Council, 2019, 2021, 2022. Headquarters, San Francisco, Suburra. He scrolled. The third image was from a gala fundraiser 8 months ago. A ballroom. White tablecloths. In the foreground, in a navy dress, hair up, one hand resting on the arm of the man beside her who was clearly her father. Rachel Alexandra Cole, Director of Strategic Development, Cole Group. Ethan set his phone face down on the table. He looked at the ceiling, the crack running toward the window he'd been meaning to patch for 4 months, the water stain from the leak he'd fixed last winter, his kitchen, his house, his $180 electrical jobs, and his corner booth with the clear sightline to the door. She had sat across from him at a coffee shop and said, "I need to know if I could have." And he had understood that. He had believed her. He had worked alongside her for 2 weeks without once adjusting how he treated her based on what he suspected she might be. He hadn't known the scale, but that, he realized, wasn't the part that stayed with him. What stayed was simpler. He had treated her like a person. He had asked what she wanted. They had trusted each other's read on things, and built something that worked, not because of her father's name, but because of what each of them actually knew how to do. He was still looking at the ceiling when Lucy padded out from her room, trailing her blanket, hair sideways. "Dad? You okay?" "Yeah, Bug. Go back to sleep." She stood in the doorway, squinting at him. Then she looked at the phone on the table, face down, and back at him. "Is it about Rachel?" she asked. He looked at his daughter, at the complete certainty on her face, not anxiety, just a logistics question, the way she asked whether tomorrow was a library day. "Yeah," he said. "It is." She considered this for a moment. Then she said, with the authority of someone who had already settled the matter, "She stayed, Dad, even when it was hard." She turned and went back to bed. Ethan sat there for a long time after that. He picked up the phone, looked at the photograph one more time. Rachel Alexandra Cole. Then he put the phone in his pocket and looked out the window at the street. Quiet. 3 houses down, a porch light on. The Delgado's fence straight and solid in the dark, new boards pale against old ones. He thought about a man in a gray-green jacket standing outside his house for 17 minutes. He thought about Diane Marsh and a folder she'd carried for 2 years because she couldn't make herself delete it. He thought about a woman who'd had a phone call away from safety the entire time and had chosen not to make it, not out of recklessness, but because she needed to know what she was made of. He understood that better than she probably realized. He called her on a Saturday afternoon, 1 week later. She answered on the second ring. "I have a condition," he said. "Tell me." "First week, I want to walk all 3 sites before I sign anything. Talk to the foreman myself." "I'll have the site coordinators ready," she said. "And Lucy wants to know if the office has windows. She says she won't work for a company where people don't have windows. She's 8 and apparently has opinions about workplace conditions." A sound on the other end of the line. Not a professional laugh. Something that came from somewhere real, from the part of a person that existed before they learned to manage how they came across. 14th floor, Rachel said. She can see the whole city. Outside, Lucy was on her bike, attempting to ride without holding the handlebars. She failed. She tried again. She failed better. Ethan watched her. Doing the right thing doesn't pay the bills. He had known that his whole adult life, built a life around it, made peace with it. Until 1 week, one very specific, very strange week in Phoenix, it did. But that wasn't why he'd done it. It had never been why. And standing in his yard on a Saturday afternoon, watching his daughter refuse to stop trying, he thought that was probably the most important part of the whole story. There's a version of this story that's about money. A waitress. A job offer. A number with a lot of zeros. But that's not really what happened. What happened was a man who had every reason to look away, chose not to. Not because he expected anything in return. Not because he knew who she was. But because he was the kind of person who couldn't sit still when something was wrong. And he had spent enough years making his world small that he'd almost forgotten that about himself. And a woman who could have ended it all with one phone call, didn't. Because she needed to find out what she was actually made of, underneath the name and the money and everything her father had built. They both found out. That's the thing about doing the right thing quietly, without an audience, without a guarantee. It doesn't always pay off. But sometimes it changes everything. And more importantly, it changes you. The world doesn't always reward good people. But it remembers them. And so do the ones who were there. If you made it all the way here, that means something. Drop a comment and tell me, which moment hit you the hardest? Was it Ethan standing up in that diner? Rachel staying when she didn't have to? Or something quieter than that? I read every single one. And your comments are genuinely why the next story gets made. Like if this one stayed with you. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. See you there?